Welcome to Single World News podcast. Today, our guest is my dear friend Omlan, who is a big Netaji aficionado. He worked with many very big MNCs like Wipro, Cognizant for over 20 years. Currently, he is with LTI, Mindful. But today, he will be working on his personal capacity. He is
Yes.
not only a great admirer of Netaji, he has also done a lot of research on Netaji. And today, on the occasion of 23rd January, we will hear from him a lot about Netaji.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I think two or three points or disclaimers. One, first of all, a very big thank you to Angshuman, to you and your team for having me over. Uh, Secondly, it's a big, and this is a big opportunity for me. Thank you so much. Secondly, I would just like to make it very clear that thank you for your kind words, but I don't really call myself a Netaji researcher. There are so many tons of people who have spent and dedicated decades of their life researching on this very important topic. I am no researcher. What I have certainly done is I have read up on a lot of books and articles and reports and stuff like that, which talk about areas which are very little known. Very few people know about those things. So, whilst there is, and rightfully so, a huge amount of passion and emotion around Netaji, many people really do not know exactly what happened to him, and much about his later years. And frankly speaking, to be very honest with you, Angshuman, pretty much nobody does. However, there are some people who know a little more about him than others, and I just happen to have read a lot of their works. That is about it. And of course, I also have been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to visit some of his special places, and I will talk about those later in this program.
So let's start at the very beginning.
Sure.
Netaji is a great inspiration to
Sure.
me and pretty much everyone I know around me, to all the Indians. He was instrumental in getting the Britishers out of India. We all know that. Today, I would start with a very basic question. So, what about the plane crash? Do you think Netaji died in the plane crash as the government story claimed, or there is more to it? And how we can be sure that he really didn't die in the plane crash?
Sure, this is a very important question. So, Angshuman, it's like this. If you ask anybody, right, anybody in the government of India or anybody aligned with the government, as well as large number of people, what happened to Netaji, how did he meet his end? The standard answer is that he died in this plane crash on the 18th of August, 1945, just off what was then known as in what was then known as Taihoku, which is present day Taiwan. Okay, so that is the official story. But since then, since the 1940s, okay, even then, and as you probably know, there have been three inquiry commissions or committees which were constituted to investigate his death slash disappearance mystery. Even in the first one, whilst two out of three people on the committee attested to the air crash, one person in that committee, Mr. Suresh Bose, who was one of Netaji's own brothers, he had written and submitted a dissentient report which clearly stated that Netaji had not died.
Okay.
And in subsequent investigations, uh, there were two people of significant note. One, Justice Mukherjee of the Mukherjee Commission, right? He had gone down to Taiwan, present day Taiwan, inquired with government officials, moved around, asked people, etc. And he clearly deduced that there was no air crash in Taiwan around the time period that is claimed. Similarly, well known writer, investigative journalist Anuj Dhar, I mean, and honestly speaking, it was his seminal book, India's Biggest Cover Up, that actually got me very interested in this whole story. So Anuj Dhar had also gone to Taiwan and met many people. He has in writing from the government of Taiwan that around that day there was absolutely no plane crash. Okay, so if you kind of keep a logical mind and see the different data points that we get, uh, I would say that there is no plane crash in which Netaji is said to have expired.
So when there is so much concrete evidence,
Okay.
can the government be presented with these facts in hand? Few days back, we were having a meet with Anuj Dhar, and he
Mhm.
mentioned about he has certain DNA evidence that
Mhm.
they are not Netaji's
Right.
wife, etc. The point is, why not actually go and meet with these people, with the government official, and make it official that he really didn't die in the plane crash? What do you think is stopping the government from acknowledging that? What harm can come of the country? And now that we have a government which has the benefit of country in mind, why is still hesitation? What do you think?
Uh, Now we are getting into areas which are, oh, how do I put this? Okay, so one point is very clear that this current regime at the center absolutely is certainly not like what we had with the Congress regimes who were like completely against Netaji from way back, from way before the independence also. And I will give you one simple one simple data point which will make it clear that Modi ji himself, right, is quite aware, probably, that that plane crash did not happen. How? In his first state visit after taking over as prime minister, when Modi ji went to Japan, he was the first president or prime minister not to pay tribute at the Renkoji temple, where Netaji's ashes are purported to be kept. Modi ji was the first prime minister or president who did not go to the Renkoji temple.
So
Okay,
he has his doubts, obviously.
he has, at the very least, if he is not certain, he is definitely very, very doubtful. That much is clear. Okay, so he didn't go. Okay, number one. And uh, let's say then the natural questions will arise. If he did not die in that crash, then what? Okay, so uh, there are actually multiple theories because obviously his whole life, at least from the early 40s, being such a mystery, there are so many theories about him. And actually, let me just take this opportunity also to highlight a couple of, I would say, popular narratives, which are, I would say, at the bare minimum, they are not certain. Okay. Personally, I do not agree with those, but since this is on a public platform, I will say there is no guarantee or no confirmation that those actually are true. Okay. One is his great escape of 1941. Okay. Based on certain declassified documents that I have seen, and I have seen copies of those, and let's say, what do we know about the Great Escape, right? So, on the night of 16th or 17th of January 1941, Netaji disguised himself as a Pathan and was driven out surreptitiously by his nephew, Sise Kumar Bose, right?
Right.
And Shishir Bose drove him out, and he went to the what is the I think the current name is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Station Gomo, or by then at that point of time it was known as Junction. And from there he took a train, went to Peshawar, and then Afghanistan, blah 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 blah. This is what is commonly known. I have personally seen declassified documents in which Shishir Bose himself asks the government of India if any detail is known about the Great Escape. Okay, so there is every reason to doubt the narrative that it was Shishir Bose himself who drove him out.
That is very interesting.
Yes, there is every reason to doubt that. That car that is on display at Netaji Bhavan, whether it was at all that car, we don't know. Maybe, may not be. I am nobody to say it was not. But uh, to conclude without any shadow of doubt that it was that one indeed, I am personally not sure at all. Shoboshaji, can you get Ongshuman back? I think he's dropped off.
Yeah, just wait a minute.
Yeah. So we are back, Ongshuman.
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
as I was saying, yeah, that's fine. So as I was saying, that Great Escape, honestly speaking, there is no conclusive evidence that proves the common narrative. Okay, that is the first part of the one of the first part of the two facts I'm talking about. The second one is after he was in when he was in Germany, right? Uh, we hear anywhere if you check online, you will find that people say that Netaji during that period he developed a relationship with a German lady, an Austrian lady, or German or Austrian lady, Emily Schenkel, right? And people say they were either married or in just a live-in relationship, and they had a child by the name of Anita Schenkel Puff. Today, this bit, I have seen enough evidence to convince me that this is completely fictitious. Okay.
Okay.
For starters, yes, Netaji did know Emily Schenkel personally. It's not that the that individual herself is kind of a figment of imagination. No, she did. What? How Netaji knew her is that she was his personal secretary, cum stenographer, when he was in Europe, when he was spending his days in Germany. So that is the extent of their relation. There was absolutely no personal relationship because fundamentally, one thing that is very important to understand is that from his very young days, from his even before he completed his graduation, he was of a very religious and spiritual bent of mind. He even left home once at least and spent time with his close friend Sri Hemanto Sarkar, looking for a spiritual guru. Spent plenty of days and days and days in UP for this purpose, and came back only, I think, only after he fell very sick.
I
So
had went out multiple times in search of a
I
guru.
said at least once. At
Yes.
least once, I know, probably multiple times. You're right. So somebody who is of a very religious and spiritual mind, bent of mind, and for him, there were only two things that were really important. Personal relationships mattered zilch. One, of course, was getting his motherland, his Matribhumi, liberated of the British oppressors. That was absolutely vital for him. And the second and a most important thing was, and also second and also a very important thing was his sadhana. That for him, like, so when people say that, oh, why do you think Netaji couldn't marry or have a companion? Isn't that normal? Yes, it is normal. It's probably normal for me or somebody else who I may be having this conversation with. But for somebody who is by inclination a pure sadhak, for that person, this is absolutely not normal and not in line with his personality.
I may be going ahead in this
Sure,
podcast.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Was Gumnami Baba ever confronted with this thought that
Oh,
whether
absolutely. Absolutely. And Bhagwanji clearly said, I am a bachelor and I'm a bachelor. I've always practiced brahmacharya. There's absolutely, those are all lies. He said that very clearly. I mean, I hope I'm not putting words. I don't want to quote him, but yes, he very clearly said, you all Indians are my family. I don't have any separate family like that.
so
Okay, yeah. So if I may continue, so
this
these are the two very important parts that people should understand, that the common popular narrative is not necessarily sacrosanct. So after these, let's say the early 40s, when there is again, oh, and the third point, this we all have heard of this historic and monumental journey he made from Germany to Singapore, where he came through submarines, and then in the middle, somewhere near the Cape of Good Hope, he transferred from a Japanese submarine to from a German submarine to a Japanese submarine, and all that, those historic stuff. Again, all that may not be necessarily true. I'm not saying it is not. He certainly was in Germany. He certainly reached Singapore. I'm just saying the modality may not be as historic and as monumental as we thought it was. I
but
don't have a.
I thought I saw a picture of him transferring from the submarine.
Uh, that's what I'm saying. It's a very. I've recently, basically, I'll tell you this. Uh, there is somebody, an elderly professor friend of mine who is a decades-long researcher, and was also one of the deponents of the Justice Mukherjee Commission. Okay, who is a, like, I would consider him one of the very important authorities in this field. From him, I have recently learned that this may not have exactly happened this way. Certainly, there were some major things that happened, but we don't know exactly. That's all I'm saying. He was in Germany. He came to Singapore. On that, there is no doubt. How and what exactly, we don't know really. That's all I'm saying. Okay. So then once he from Germany, when he came back to Singapore, when he was returned to Asia, Singapore, the Azad Hind Fauj, many people also think that Netaji constituted and started the Azad Hind Fauj. Correction, he did not. The Azad Hind Fauj was in place, I think, around a year and a half before he came to Singapore. What had happened was Captain Mohan Singh, who was the leader of the first version of the Azad Hind Fauj, right? And that actually was the brainchild of one of the key people who were the brainchild who kind of conceived this, was our somebody I really idolize, Sri Rajbihari Bose, right? So he ideated this forces, unarmed forces, to which would be, uh, kind of be ready to attack the mainland, our main our the country, and free the country of the British. So this Azad Hind Fauj was first leader was Captain Mohan Singh. So around that time, the Japanese were making a lot of big, you know, uh, incursions into the what is the Indonesian archipelago, Singapore, and all of those places. And also, it must be borne in mind that the in the Azad Hind Fauj was essentially kind of drawn from people who were POWs with the Japanese, right? So naturally, the Japanese thought they could kind of give inputs into how the Azad Hind Fauj would function. Naturally, if they were giving the people, they would try to kind of make some kind of inputs and try to have some say. Thereafter, what happened was Captain Mohan Singh, perhaps Rajbihari Bose himself, they were not very comfortable with what was happening. That there was too much Japanese say into all of this. So what they did is they decided that this is not going on the way we want to. Let us disband it. And the uh, what happened was they actually ended up disbanding the Azad Hind Fauj, the first version of it, right? So when Netaji was coming, Rajbihari Bose got wind of that information. He then planned it that way that they discussed internally and then they decided that somebody of the stature of Netaji Bose, if he took charge, then probably some more. I mean, this next edition of the Azad Hind Fauj would probably be more effective. And maybe the Japanese wouldn't kind of try to butt in that much. And so it happened. When Netaji came to Singapore and when he actually took charge, two things happened. One, the Japanese had heard about him a lot and they had huge, immense regard for Netaji, far more than any of the existing leaders. As a result, Netaji didn't have to face Japanese, let's say, inputs, number one. Number two, his oratory. I'm not sure if you have heard his original speeches on YouTube. A couple of them are still available. Few of them are still available. His oratory was so inspiring that it led to a new lease of life amongst the INA. And thereafter, the things he did, today's, I mean, our generation cannot even think of. For somebody who had made those kind of arduous trips all over Europe and then come to Asia, he actually set up a government in exile. I have somehow I'm going blank. I don't remember the exact because the language he used, Netaji would use, was not Hindi, right? He used a version of Hindi which was then known as Hindustani. Now I remember. And he called it Arze Hukumate Azad Hind, okay, which we known in English as Provisional Government of Free India, right?
Right.
So, where he was himself the president, prime minister, and I think the minister for defense or war minister something. He had a few important portfolios, and there were other ministry. If you just check online, you can find all the details of his cabinet. So those things, these happened, and then of course he kind of launched attacks on through the. There was the Battle of Kohima, Northeast India. Then uh, uh, for some brief period, some islands of the Andaman and Nicobar also were in part of his territory, etc., etc. That was actually, and that was a government. It is important to realize it was recognized by something like I think around close to 11 countries of the time, right? So we should rightfully be asserting that Netaji Subhash Bose is our first president and our first prime minister.
True.
Because, right? That's number one. Number two is okay. So after those things happened, and unfortunately, whilst the initially Battle of Kohima, there were a lot of important gains made. But then, of course, the British had superior air power and much more. And the Indian Army, unfortunate, it was very unfortunate for us, but it was the Indian Army led by, backed by the Air Force, which repelled the Azad Hind Fauj
And it's a
ultimately.
strange story that I heard
Tell me.
about the lake of no return in that region, which apparently consumed, like led to the demise of quite a lot of INA soldiers. Have you heard about
Oh, interesting. No, I'll have to read up on this. I've not heard of this. Right. So great. So thank you.
so
Something I have
it's
learned.
like India's Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, is it? That's very interesting. I didn't know about this. Very interesting. I'll read up on this. Okay. So okay. After this, what happened then was right. So now we fast forward to August 1945. On the 22nd of August, a message reaches India that our beloved leader died 4 days ago in a plane crash in Taihoku. Right. So naturally, most of the country was in shock, disbelief, and complete grief. Naturally, a few days later, when his Shraddha is happening, his Mejda, who was his favorite brother, amongst his entire generation of, there were like, I think, 8 or 10 or whatever, the large number of brothers and sisters. His Mejda Sharad Bose, who was a like iconic freedom fighter and a leader himself, right? Sharad Bose, who is at his Shraddha, receives a telegram from Gandhiji. He asks Sharad Bose not to proceed with the Shraddha, right? Because he has reason to believe that Subhash abhi bhi zinda hai. That is a telegram sent by Gandhiji to the Bose family
Have
at
you
their
seen?
Shraddha.
Do you know where that telegram might be there, or is there any? You know,
I would not know. I will have to check with the people I look up to for this aspect. I honestly don't know myself. But this the telegram he received, and this was actually also shown in the film Gumnami, because the film Gumnami, if you realize, was mostly based on facts. Of course, it kind of twisted it to make a proper film screenplay, kind of adapted it,
right.
but it was a very good representation of what actually happened or what may have happened. So this was also shown there, and so on. Now, so again, now I come back to those questions. If he did not die in the plane crash, what happened? Where did he go? Right, and at this point, I'll just take a very brief detour and kind of ask your audience. So, if, for example, your grandfather or grandmother, one fine day, he or she disappears, wouldn't you want to know what happened?
True.
If he or she is dead, where and how did he or she die?
Absolutely.
Right? Because I identify this with all this all the more because my paternal grandmother is exactly also born in 1897. But at least I know when and how where she died. But with Netaji, really nobody knows this. This is something that really pains me a lot as a Netaji admirer and bhakt. That how is it and why is it that there is so little? Only a very few of us, maybe people like you and me, who are worried about it and wonder what happened. But unfortunately, the vast majority of us somehow have seemed to have, at least seemed to have moved on. This is something that I really find it very painful. Anyway, so to come back to this question, what we have learned is that that air crash was actually designed to be conveyed as such by Netaji himself. He intended it as a smokescreen because if you remember those days, uh, I mean, I can't say you remember those days. None of us were born then. But what I'm trying to say is, if you remember the situation then, what happened was the Allied forces were clearly winning World War II. In fact, they had finished with the dropping of the nuclear bombs in August 1945. They had effectively ended the war,
Right.
right? And since Netaji had allied with the Axis powers, right, he knew well that they would come after him, and not just come after him. They, if they ever got hold of him, he would then be branded a war criminal,
Right.
right? Because he was allied, he allied with German, with the Nazi Germany, he allied with the Japanese. So there is no way he would not be, branded a war criminal. And then you know what happens to those war criminals. So they never get loose, they never get free. So he chose to fake his own death, go undercover to Soviet Russia, where he had already visited once or twice before and had developed very good equation, very good rapport with the leaders there. So that's what he did. 1 or 2 days before the so called plane crash, he took the help of his Japanese friends. They escorted him to Dairen, current day Manchuria, which was at that time under Soviet control.
Okay.
There, they handed him over to the Russians, and the Russians took him under their aegis. Right? Thereafter, now is where things become extremely, let's say, unclear. What we do know is that initially he was kind of let be, he was a guest of Stalin because with Stalin he had a pretty decent equation. Then, under pressure, because Nehru had written to Attlee. I don't know if you may have heard of this note because Nehru had written a note to Attlee. Nehru, who had come to hear that Netaji has actually kind of faked his own death, he wrote a note to Attlee saying something to the effect. Again, I'm not quoting exact words, but he said that Subhash Chandra Bose is a guest of your friend, the Russians. I leave it to your good officers to decide what you should do with him. This is something Nehru had written, and there is evidence for this note.
That is
I have
how.
seen that myself.
That is truly.
So, yes, it is. And these things actually show up Jawaharlal Nehru for the person he was. I don't want to waste time criticizing him because that is not the objective of this discussion. But that is really what he was, yes. There is evidence that he had written this note to Attlee. When Attlee saw this, he kind of prevailed upon Stalin to at least keep him in detention. So that is what Stalin had to do. Since this guy was a collaborator of the Axis powers, Stalin had to give in and keep him in one of his gulags. Now, here there is possibly a little sliver of light. There are multiple accounts that say that Netaji, whilst he was in a gulag, he was in one of those which were referred to as VIP gulags, which basically means yes, it is a gulag, yes, you are in confinement, but for the most part at least, but he was taken very good care of, right? So this is at least for some time, maybe or maybe later on he was put in a regular gulag. I'm not entirely clear on this myself. So then the story moves ahead to the late 1940s or maybe around 1950, when he, and like everything, this is part is so unclear. So he was either released or he made good an escape. We don't know for sure which one. And he then moves from Soviet Union to China. In China, if you recall what was happening then, there was a struggle, a battle going on between the Kuomintang forces and the Red Army led by Chairman Mao. Right. Uh, Chairman Mao gave him shelter, took his inputs, and I mean Mao was probably anyway winning, but and they were pushing the Kuomintang forces out of the mainland. And anyway, with Netaji's inputs, that just task also kind of it helped him even more. Again, there are some reports which say that before Netaji left China, I think he spent probably a few months or maybe a year and a half, something. He did help. I think I read this somewhere, either in one of Anuj's books or somewhere else in one of the other books. He helped Chairman Mao develop a blueprint to for how to develop China in decades to come. So, if China today has developed a fair bit, and whatever may be the let's say the ghotala in their numbers, right? It still we cannot deny that they are a very large economy.
True.
And whilst there is little to no freedom in terms of the different basic freedoms we expect, their the state of their development is seriously high.
Yeah, I remember
Again,
seeing picture where someone who's very similar to Netaji with Chinese leader. I think I saw one or two
yes,
pictures. So
yes. So then, around sometime in the early 1950s, he comes back to India through Tibet, okay, where he probably would have met the Dalai Lama. So when he came back to Tibet, in Tibet was where he, from what I understand, this was actually shown in the film Gumnami, that he actually kind of underwent a serious transformation, took the vows of a monk, and came back to India, northern India. Different, he was living in different cities where nobody knows, mostly in different cities of sub-Himalayan UP. Sometimes he lived for a period in Lucknow as well, where different people knew him. It is said that wherever he has lived in Lucknow and in his last days in then what is then known as Faizabad, today called Ayodhya, everybody, the government, all knew it was Netaji living there. They didn't kind of trouble him. They, in fact, sometimes went to him for inputs, for advice. They let him be, he let them be. It was just like a coexistence, a peaceful, harmonious coexistence. Now, what is also important to understand is oh, okay, another very interesting anecdote here. Very few people know that there is reason to believe that whilst he would be staying in different cities and small towns and villages in northern India, from time to time he would also leave the country and go out to different, let's say, different countries to help leaders wherever any imperialist was, because all his life he was fighting against imperial forces. So, for example, in around 1958 59, I forget the exact year, when he heard that the Chinese forces were overrunning Tibet, he went out to Lhasa, gave the gave the Dalai Lama some very specific inputs, helped him escape from Lhasa because the Chinese were pretty confident because Chinese definitely wanted to take Dalai Lama captive, right? So he actually, again, this is with a disclaimer. This is not 100%. I'm not saying this with 100% confidence. Just a story I've heard, I read. Okay, he went back to Lhasa, and helped the Dalai Lama escape from Tibet, which was going under Chinese rule, to come back to Dharamshala. So this is one, and I'm just trying to recall. There was some, I think, an American journalist who had written a book which included this incident, and there Dalai Lama, and okay, one of those who were reporting on this was referring to somebody as General Death. So if you do a little bit of search as who is General Death and how he did this, you'll kind of find something about this. Okay.
Maybe we
So
can interview Dalai Lama.
brilliant. Let's go ahead. That would be a fantastic idea. Oh, and I would love to at least listen to that if live, if not be part of it. Anyway, so what happens then is 60s again. He was then around the late 60s, he goes back out of the country and intervenes in what we know as the Vietnam War.
Okay.
If you realize, there were kind of the two belligerents on two parts. One was the North Vietnam forces, the other South Vietnam forces. The South Vietnam forces were backed by the US Army, no less. All the others were all local, local ragtag soldiers, different parties, blah, blah, blah. The mighty US Army came a cropper against the North Vietnam led coalition, led by Uncle Ho. The world knows whom as Ho Chi Minh. Okay, so Ho Chi Minh, aided by Netaji gave him some very solid inputs. Based on and using those inputs, they kind of were able to overcome the US-backed coalition. Then, of course, in 1971, we had the Bangladesh Liberation War, where too he had a significant influence. So all of these were happening whilst. Now, I did tell you a little while back that the government officials were very much aware that Netaji was living incognito in certain places, in certain towns. Once, for a period of time, he even lived in Lucknow, and all of this. However, it is to our eternal shame, and we should all be feeling very wretched about this. The man for whom we have our liberation, for whom we have our freedom, he spent the last at least 25 years of his life, let's say, that's a question mark, but let's keep it like this. Last 25 years of what we know in complete, let's say, horrendous conditions. Sometimes he had one meal a day, sometimes not even that. He often had to, live in, let's say, very squalid, very poor conditions. And it was only towards the end, at a place called, at a building called Ram Bhavan, in the town of Faizabad, today called Ayodhya, when he had a decent living conditions.
So, do you think?
Yeah,
So, we kind of skipped over one point, which is
tell me.
we are assuming that Gumnami Baba is Netaji in
Hmm.
hiding, but then as we have already skipped it, so I'm just coming to the next
Yes,
question.
please.
Do you
I
believe
kind
that
of
he
went with the flow. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, please.
did he really die when he's purported to have left his mortal body? There are also some people saying, I mean, I personally heard that he knows someone who went to Gyanganj and found Netaji there.
Yeah, right. I was coming
Yeah,
to all that. Okay.
go
So
ahead.
there are, as I told you today, I was telling you last night before when we were just planning to have this discussion. There are multiple theories around him. The first official narrative that he died in that crash in 1945. There is a second narrative, second set of theories which are attested to by multiple scholars, which include Mrs. Srimati Purabi Roy, Major General G.D. Bakshi, who affirm that Netaji never left Russia. He was killed when he was in whilst in he was died or he was killed. He died in there in one of the gulags there. That is what they assert. The third school of thought says that he came back and he lived incognito in different towns, villages, etc. And whilst there and yeah, and the last few years he lived in Faizabad, which is now Ayodhya, and he finally breathed his last in September 1985. Right? So that's why I said that is the third school of thought. Fourth school of thought, to which I personally subscribe, is that September 1985 was 1945 Redux, right? So what do I mean by that? So there are people, many people, including and just to I know there are we have 13 minutes only left, so I'll just keep this short. I have personally visited Ram Bhavan in Faizabad, Ayodhya, uh, 2018, if I recall, and I went there on 23rd January, right? People there in at Ram Bhavan, they were absolutely convinced that that was Netaji. Okay, they were 100%. They had absolutely no doubt. Okay, that is one. Secondly, uh, there is a very well-known researcher by name, like we are namesake. He's my namesake, Sri Omlan Kushum Ghosh. Okay, he brought out a documentary film called docudrama, I would say, with some adaptations, of course, called Shonnashi Deshonayak. Okay, and that film was released in November 2022. If I recall, I think I was telling you that I had gone to see this film. In that film, Omlanda, sorry if I am breaking something telling about your film. In that film, he shows very clearly, even in 1985, Gumnami Baba or Bhagwanji made good his escape. He went away somewhere. That is what is clearly shown in that film. There are even, let's say, even if you don't look at a film, what happened was when he was being cremated, okay, two, three aspects. He was cremated on the banks of the Sarayu of Guptar Ghat, right? One is that is a military cantonment area. How would a normal sadhu be cremated in a military area? Is that normal? That's not normal, right? Why should the military allow anybody to be cremated there? That's point number one. Point number two, visited that place as I have told you, and on the plaque of his Shamadhi, it is written date of birth 23rd January 1897. Date of death, question mark. And the third important question that needs to be asked, he had, Bhagwanji had told us on a number of occasions that he was a bona fide Shonnashi of the Doshonami order.
Okay.
As far as I know, my limited knowledge goes, Doshonami Shonnashis, realized Doshonami Shonnashis, they are not cremated. You may be, probably you would know it better, but as far as I have read,
Normally, they try not to cremate. That is true.
exactly the point.
Certain
Yeah.
cases, like during the rule of the Britishers, Sri Ramakrishna had
Those were, that's fine. I'm saying nowadays,
the British pressure.
normally nowadays, Doshonami Shonnashis would not be cremated.
Any good sannyasi normally,
Shonnashis, yes, would not be created. Sorry, not be cremated. So that being said, what happened? Honest answer, very honest answer from me would be, I do not know. My friend, I am a trained auditor and I only go by evidence. So I have not seen any tangible evidence anywhere. Yes, as you mentioned, Gyanganj, I have heard that, but it is only hearsay. I really do not know. Could be Gyanganj or could be anywhere else. Probably he's just immersed in Samadhi, Dhyan, Tapasya in the Himalayas somewhere. I don't know. So somebody as enigmatic as him, the overwhelming majority of facts about him are really not known. So, which is really, really unfortunate because after all, he lived his entire life for us,
What
right?
really surprises me is like I'm actually very saddened by it that a person of his so high caliber, such an inspirational person, suddenly he has vanished from the life of Bharat. And if he was today, or at least during his normal lifetime, um, he would have done tremendous benefit for Bharat. And today we would have been in a
Undoubtedly, today where America is, I'm saying in terms of the stature, not where they are as a society, of course, but in terms of the stature, economically and military, that is where Bharat would have been.
yes. I mean, such a talented person, such an inspirational person.
Absolute inspiration,
India lost unimaginably with his
unimaginable.
disappearance. And
Absolutely.
today, we are getting to know some more facts about Netaji, some more facts that surrounded our independence. And these are becoming more and more public knowledge. But even today, I know many people who are not aware of this.
Yeah, for example, many people think that Quit India, it was the Quit India movement of 1942 which
Yeah,
led to our independence, which is
yeah,
so much, let's say, complete bedtime stories, right?
exactly.
What
Okay.
led to our independence, people need to read up, is it was the fervor of patriotism, which whilst militarily Azad Hind Fauj may have lost, but when the stories of their bravery came through to the mainland, there was a huge rebellion, mutiny
In the
by
name of
the armed forces, and it was that because the British were very, smug in their knowledge that whilst we have control of the army, we will rule India. But when the army and the navy and even later on the air force, all of them, when they mutinied, that is when the British realized that our days are up here.
because the Britishers cannot control India
Of
without
course,
the help of Indians. And if Indians are
exactly the
rising
point.
up,
Yeah,
then it's a lost case for them.
absolutely. That is why they ultimately
And their
left.
strategies failed across the world. So that was approximately the
Right.
time they had to relinquish their
Yes. Yeah. Plus,
mammoth
of course,
power
they were weakened. World
and
War II weakened them considerably. So that was another issue. Yes.
and that is something we need to be thankful for, because despite
Oh,
all the mayhem, it had a
yes.
benefit for India.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. All the violence, all the deaths, all the injuries, all the loss, all the economical damage. Nobody wants that, certainly. But yes,
It is, it was great having you on this show.
my pleasure, my honor.
And today, on 23rd January, I think people will enjoy.
Yes,
And
yes. And before we wrap up, I really, 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 really want to first and foremost bow my head down to Netaji and his. I would not say his entire family because there were some of his family members not entirely aligned with him. But I really want to bow down to Netaji wherever you are. We are because you were, and you are.
India
And
owes a great debt of
yes, a
gratitude.
huge, huge debt of gratitude. And I would really, really appeal to all Indians, all Bharatiyas, I prefer the term. I would appeal to all Bharatiyas, please, please read up more. Please take out a few minutes of your time every week. Try to read up on Netaji and, and try to, let's say, it will be too grandiose on my part to say we should live his ideals. But whatever little we can kind of we should try to emulate. I mean, we can't think of him even emulating what he has done, but at least let us be inspired by his ideals. That
His
will be the
ideals
biggest,
will create
yeah, yeah.
Swamiji
That will be the
Netaji.
biggest tribute to him. Yes,
Swamiji and Netaji's idea
absolutely,
to make the
absolutely,
new Bharat
absolutely.
the Bharat that
Absolutely.
leads the world
Unquestionably.
amongst years.
Yep, yep, yep.
Thank you. Jai
Thank
Hind.
you. Thank Jai Hind. Joy to Netaji. Thank you.